They said it was over. Sealed. Finished. Closed. That's what the announcement suggested, the statements in the media, the polished summaries, the carefully worded denials. But 5 minutes ago, everything changed. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly. No cameras flashing, no press releases blasting across headlines. And yet, the message could not have been clearer. Buckingham Palace has confirmed that a confidential investigation into Meghan Markle's past allegations has been reopened. Staff complaints, testimonies once dismissed, voices once silenced, now resurfacing. The palace did not call it a scandal. They did not call it a reckoning. They called it an internal matter. And that is precisely why it matters. Because what is not said, when the world expects noise, often speaks louder than anything spoken aloud. It's worth asking, right at the outset, why this is happening now. Months, even years after the case was supposedly sealed. Why did the palace choose discretion over disclosure? Why reopen doors that everyone assumed were locked? And most importantly, who benefits from this reopening? And who pays the cost? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're questions that cut to the heart of institutional trust, of accountability, and of human consequences. Because while headlines often reduce a situation to gossip, the truth, the human truth, is messier, quieter, and far more consequential. From the very first reports, the framing was subtle. The word reopened is deliberately neutral. It implies procedural necessity rather than dramatic judgment. It implies a step back into the shadows, into corridors of power that the public cannot see. And yet, the mere act of reopening signals something. Something unsettled. Something unresolved. When the palace confirms an investigation quietly, without fanfare, it's not a denial. It's a signal. It's a warning. And to understand what this means, we need to step beyond the tabloids, beyond the surface-level narratives, and examine what happens when institutions decide that silence is no longer sufficient. Consider the contradiction. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, has been portrayed repeatedly in the public eye as a figure of controversy, often framed through polarizing lenses. Some view her as a victim of media scrutiny, others as a disruptor of tradition. And yet, here we are being told, officially, that certain allegations and complaints from the past are worth revisiting. Allegations that had been sealed in official records. Complaints that had supposedly been investigated, closed, and filed away. What changed? Was it the emergence of new testimony? A reassessment of old evidence? Or was it simply the realization that ignoring these voices might carry a risk too great to leave unchecked? It's difficult to know at this moment, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this story gripping and, frankly, unsettling. It's also important to remember the human dimension. Investigations are often portrayed as dry, procedural affairs. Reports, memos, legal jargon. But behind every note, every testimony, every confidential file, there are people. Former staff who felt ignored. Current employees who whispered concerns in hallways. Witnesses who once feared reprisal or dismissal. These are not abstract facts. They are experiences. Emotional, sometimes raw, often suppressed. And the reopening of an investigation is not merely an administrative act. It is a reopening of past wounds, a resurgence of questions that some believed had been laid to rest. How do you navigate that as an institution? How do you reconcile confidentiality with accountability? And how do you manage the inevitable leak, the inevitable speculation, when the world outside the palace walls will want answers it may never get? What's striking, and perhaps most disorienting, is the methodical way this has emerged, not with sensational headlines or dramatic statements, but as a quiet confirmation, almost buried amid other news. The phrasing matters. Confidential investigation, the announcement said. Staff complaints being reviewed with new testimonies. It does not accuse. It does not absolve. It does not speculate. It merely confirms that the matter exists and that it matters enough to revisit. That is a tension most stories never maintain. Usually, public scandals erupt with the force of fireworks, leaving no room for subtlety. This is different. This is measured, calculated, and, in its restraint, profoundly unsettling. And then there's the matter of timing. 5 minutes ago, this became official. Not yesterday. Not last week. Not months ago when a leak might have been controlled or framed differently. Right now, in real time, The palace has chosen this moment to quietly acknowledge an investigation that the world thought was settled. Timing, in these situations, is rarely coincidental. It suggests external pressure, yes, but perhaps more importantly, internal calculation. It raises the possibility that someone within these walls realized that leaving the past untouched could be more dangerous than reopening it. But who? And why? These are questions that cannot be answered yet, but they hang over the story like a shadow. There's also an irony here that cannot be ignored. Publicly, Meghan Markle has been both demonized and lionized. She has been the subject of endless analysis, critique, and debate. And yet, official recognition of staff concerns, real, documented, serious concerns, was largely absent from the public narrative. Until now. The reopening of this investigation disrupts the dichotomy that has dominated media coverage. It forces us to consider that perhaps there are elements of her history that were never fully examined. Not for drama, not for scandal, but because institutional inertia or deliberate closure ensured they remained hidden. And when institutions reopen such matters, even quietly, it is never a trivial act. There are consequences, reputational, legal, emotional, that ripple far beyond the immediate parties. Now, let's pause and consider the stakes. For the palace, discretion is everything. Image, precedent, control over narrative. For former staff, truth matters, and the reopening may feel like vindication, though tempered by decades of frustration. For Meghan Markle, it is a reminder that the past is never fully past. And for the public, for us, it is a test of our assumptions, our biases, and our willingness to engage with complexity rather than spectacle. This story is not a story you can fully understand from a tweet, a snippet, or a single opinion. It demands attention. It demands reflection. And, crucially, it demands patience, because the revelations will not all be immediate. They will accumulate, quietly, then all at once, and the weight of what is confirmed, and what remains concealed, will be staggering. So, where do we go from here? The first step is acknowledgement. The investigation exists, and it is active. The second step is consideration. What does this reopening mean in the broader context of accountability, institutional responsibility, and public trust? And the third step, perhaps the most unsettling, is speculation. Because speculation, guided by careful observation, often illuminates what silence cannot. Why did the palace choose to reopen this investigation now, quietly, deliberately, without fanfare? What was uncovered that required revisiting files once deemed closed? And who else, quietly, is watching, waiting, and preparing to respond? These are not questions with immediate answers. They are, instead, the first threads of a larger, far more intricate tapestry. But perhaps the most disorienting element is this. Even as we begin to examine the reopening, the palace, by its own measure, is controlling the narrative. Every word, every omission, every nuance of phrasing is intentional. There is strategy here, but strategy always leaves traces. Clues for those who look closely, for those who consider not just what is said, but what is left unsaid. And it is in these spaces, the quiet, the withheld, the almost imperceptible, that the true drama resides. The reopened investigation is not merely about allegations from the past. It is about power, perception, and the fragility of reputation in institutions that are built on tradition and secrecy. In the next moments, as we trace this story, we will uncover the voices that were silenced, the complaints that were dismissed, and the new testimonies that have now forced the palace to act. We will explore the human and institutional dimensions of this reopening, the tension between discretion and exposure, between loyalty and accountability. And we will begin to understand that while 5 minutes ago, the world may have barely noticed, what comes next is likely to leave an indelible mark. Not just on those directly involved, but on the institution itself, and on the way the public perceives its power and its responsibilities. Because the truth, however quiet, has a way of emerging. And sometimes, when it does, it is impossible to ignore. It arrived quietly. No flashing headlines. No dramatic press conferences. No eager pundits lining up for instant commentary. 5 minutes ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the reopening of a confidential investigation into Meghan Markle's past allegations. Yet the statement was almost lost amid the usual churn of news. And that is exactly why it demands attention. Because silence, when expected, can be more revealing than noise. The announcement itself, sparse as it was, carries meaning that might go unnoticed if you do not pay attention to the subtleties, the phrasing, and the timing. Consider the contradiction for a moment. This is one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world, a palace where every detail, from a tie to a sentence, is meticulously curated. And yet, when faced with an investigation involving a high-profile member of the royal family, the palace chose to confirm quietly, not loudly, not with the grandeur of a press release, not with the theatrics of denial or deflection. Quietly, almost as if the world was not supposed to notice. But what does that quietness imply? Strategy? Hesitation? Fear? Or something else entirely? The exact wording of the confirmation matters. Confidential investigation. Staff complaints being reviewed with new testimonies. Notice what is absent. There is no accusation, no judgment, no framing of Meghan Markle as guilty or innocent. And yet, the decision to reopen the investigation speaks volumes. It signals that there is material, credible enough, serious enough, that the palace deemed it necessary to act. Quietly, yes, but still unmistakably. The subtlety itself is a calculated communication. It tells insiders what they need to know, warns external observers of pending developments, and maintains a veneer of control over the narrative. The palace did not want spectacle, and in this case, that choice says more than any press release ever could. Why does this matter right now? Because, despite the past headlines, the public perception, the social media storm, the story is still unresolved. The term sealed was thrown around months ago. Staff complaints had supposedly been addressed, or at least archived, considered closed. And yet, today, the files are being revisited. New testimonies, voices that were previously unrecorded or dismissed, have compelled the palace to act. Timing is not coincidental. Something, or someone, has triggered this reopening. But what exactly? And why now, after months of apparent closure? The questions are critical, and the answers are elusive. To understand the weight of this, we need to consider the environment in which the announcement occurred. Public attention is fickle. Media cycles move fast. Headlines demand instant gratification. Clickbait thrives on sensationalism, and any perceived controversy risks being reduced to gossip. The palace, aware of this, opted for restraint. But restraint is a double-edged sword. It minimizes immediate backlash, yes, but it also heightens curiosity. If there is a statement but no drama, the mind begins to fill the gaps. What are they not saying? What remains behind the doors of Buckingham Palace? That tension, the tension between disclosure and discretion, is what creates the slow-burn drama. And let us not underestimate the human aspect. The reopening of this investigation affects real people, former staff who may have been dismissed, ignored, or silenced. Current employees who watch the palace's every move carefully, knowing the ramifications of speaking out. And Meghan Markle herself, whose past behavior is under renewed scrutiny. The emotional stakes are high, but they are muted in public discourse. We are trained to see headlines as entertainment or controversy. Yet here we are, facing a situation where quiet words carry consequences as profound as any public scandal. The silence also raises questions about institutional priorities. When the palace confirms something like this quietly, it is not merely about controlling perception. It is about managing risk, preserving hierarchy, and maintaining discretion within an organization that thrives on image. The wording of the confirmation signals deliberation, careful calculation, and a recognition that public spectacle might undermine more than it would achieve. Yet, even in that careful phrasing, the truth leaks through. Reopening an investigation, even quietly, is an admission. It is an acknowledgement that prior processes were either insufficient, incomplete, or flawed. The palace is saying, something happened. And though we may not see the full picture, the fact that action is being taken speaks louder than any words can. Now consider the audience for this announcement. Not just the public, not just social media observers, not just journalists. There are insiders, advisors, staff members, legal teams, former employees, and perhaps even international observers. Quiet announcements communicate selectively. Those who need to understand the stakes immediately grasp the message, while casual observers may miss it entirely. The palace is, in essence, controlling who interprets this and who reacts. And in doing so, is exercising a type of power that is invisible yet formidable. But why the decision to act now, specifically? Timing in these situations is rarely accidental. There are several possibilities. New evidence may have surfaced. A testimony that cannot be ignored, a detail that shifts the institutional calculus. Perhaps there was an internal push for accountability that could no longer be delayed. Or perhaps the palace foresaw a future where silence could backfire spectacularly, creating far greater reputational damage if ignored. Whatever the trigger, the timing transforms a routine procedural note into a statement of urgency and gravity. It is also worth examining what this quiet confirmation does not reveal. We do not know the scope of the investigation. We do not know how many complaints are being reconsidered or what weight the new testimonies carry. We do not know if this will result in formal findings or if it is a preliminary review meant solely to assess credibility. And in that unknown lies the tension, the suspense. For an audience conditioned to instant resolution, the absence of clarity is compelling. It draws attention, maintains focus, and builds anticipation. There is an irony here that cannot be overstated. Meghan Markle's public image has been the subject of endless debate, speculation, and scrutiny. Yet, the official confirmation of staff concerns, a serious institutional action, is largely absent from headlines and social feeds. This creates a subtle contradiction between public perception and institutional reality. While the world has been caught up in sensationalized